November is going to be a tough stretch for Washington.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. We write for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. You can check out all our written work over there at si.com/college/Washington. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Lars, we've been talking about this like all morning now at this point. Washington is going to have a really tough month of November. We'll get right into it, right? Starts this week with USC, then Utah at home. They go on the road to USC, then Utah at home, Oregon State on the road, and it finishing off with the Apple Cup in Seattle against Washington State. Just what are your initial thoughts of this final month of the season as Washington has gone 8-0 so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the ironic part to where, in one sense, being 8-0 means absolutely nothing because of the month of November. But at the same point, as we were saying earlier, we're recording this on Monday, obviously, that when we were up at UW today, it's like, well, hey, it does mean something, right? Because not very many teams have gone 8-0 in UW history, right? Just starting off the season, right? So it's 4 or 5 times. If you can count them on one hand, it's a pretty impressive feat. So not that it doesn't matter. But for everything that this team came back for the national championship, to play for a Pac-12 championship, things like that, those are all in play, and they could all go away in 2 weeks. Like you could head into the Washington State game, and neither of those are a possibility. Now, no, how realistic is that? Not as realistic, but it is certainly a realistic potential to where if you beat USC but then lose 2 out of 3, there you go. The other one that I told you was if they go 3-1 and that one loss comes at the end of the season, how would you feel?
I know how you'd feel. But the one thing that we just talked about it at the right before press record, and we were laughing about it because there are so many coaching cliches in the world. One of the biggest ones is that 1-0 mindset, right? Which the coaching staff has been emphasizing this year, and it's worked really well for them. You can't fault them. It's a cliche. You can make fun of cliches all you want. That's something that our editor extraordinaire, Dan Rayleigh, does really frequently. But it's something where that's worked out for the coaching staff at this point, right? And I also wanted to highlight the number 1 because I shout out to our buddy Tony Castricone, who had a great stat the other day about Kalen DeBoer's career record in November. 1 is the number of losses that Kalen DeBoer has in the month of November as a head coach in his career. He is 27-1. As a head coach in the month of November. And that's just absolutely unreal. And that a lot of that does speak to him as just a coach and just what he's been able to instill in his players in this final month of, all right, I know how to get my team to the finish line kind of thing. And so I think that's something that does need to be just kind of noted going forward.
Right. Well, the ironic part about that, and I'm not saying it's not an impressive record and everything and all that, but the gap in between when he was a head coach at Sioux Falls and when he was a head coach at Washington, what is the record when he's a coach in general in the month of November, right? Like, because again, as an offensive coordinator, again, you can't help it if your defense gives up, 40 points a game or whatever, right? It's like, sure. I can only call the offense. We won every single time if I was, doing it and things like that. But the fact that he only has 1 loss in the month of November, it's about how he prepares his teams, right? And I think, and I think that's kind of what's been the highlight for me in the month of October is despite everything, right? You can say they had poor execution, but I don't think it was because they weren't prepared, right? I think Arizona State punched up, Stanford punched with, Oregon obviously was a once in a lifetime game and experience and everything like that. Arizona State punched above their belt and Arizona, punched above their belt. And that win is now looking better with each game that Arizona has. So I think it's a matter of perspective and kind of just keeping things within a bumper on both sides to say, hey, look, obviously it hasn't been where they want to be, right? And certainly not the caliber that Washington could be. But any other coach, and certain coaches even in even Chris Peterson, who was a legendary coach in his own right, would have dropped some of these games. I think you and I both can agree on that, to where in the past, when they did, they would play down to Stanford, they would play down to Cal, they would play down to Arizona State, versus Kalen, where it's like, if anything, this team finds a way to win. Kalen finds a way And it's the belief that the players have in him, and the coaching staff believes in the players, where at some point we're going to keep trying because no matter what, we should win this game. We are the better team. The better team ultimately won 8 straight games, but maybe it didn't look that way. But it's, again, at the end of the day, having that belief and that mindset, it's what makes it not a cliche, right? Because any coach can say, hey, we're going to go 1-0 this week, 1-0 last week.
Jimmy Lake probably said the same thing.
Right, exactly. And so, there's so many coaches that can say it, but I think with Kalen, it's just different. It just truly, and you can't really put a finger on it. It's, in a way, it's kind of like Kyle Whittingham, where what the success that he's had for a long time at Utah, where it's like the type of coach he is. He doesn't do a ton of talking. He's not the most popular name in terms of he's popular, right? But he's not the marquee, Lincoln Riley, Oregon, the Flash, all that stuff, or Urban Meyer, all these coaches that people think of. But Kyle and Kalen are right there in that they always win, they're always prepared, and they're going to get their best effort no matter what, even if it doesn't look like it.
So I'm really glad you touched on, especially the Oregon thing, because that's become a topic of conversation. After Washington hasn't necessarily looked the best in their last 2 wins, and, we talked about the flu, we talked about a lot of these other things that, probably also hindered their progress. It's not that these are excuses or anything like that. But these are just like the reality of the situation at certain points, right? That these things have come up. And there's this big narrative, especially among Duck fans. I saw somebody tagged the Locked On Huskies Twitter account. Follow it, by the way. There's another plug for you. But somebody tagged the Locked On Huskies Twitter account. Some Duck fan tagged us in a Joel Klatt video saying, oh, well, this isn't looking good for the Huskies, that Joel Klatt saying Oregon's better than Washington. First of all, Washington won the game, so we shouldn't be having this discussion right now. But second of all, I understand where that discussion is coming from. But Lars, you said this leading up to the Oregon game. Which coaching staff would you rather have? Because I'm taking a coaching staff led by Kalen DeBoer 10 times out of 10, and that can be the difference. And it's something we've talked about a lot, where we mentioned Jimmy Lake, and I know I keep saying we're going to stop talking about that, so all the Husky fans, I'm sorry. But when we look at the difference between what we saw from that coaching staff and what those players, basically a lot of these same players, looked like under that coaching staff compared to what they look like now, it's night and day. And Kalen and the rest of the guys that he's brought in there deserve so much credit for that. That is something you cannot ever take for granted, and something you can't ever just kind of disqualify in the conversation instead of, oh, well, Oregon's got more talent here, they've got more talent there. That's not always the entire conversation.
Right. Well, I mean, the ironic part is, and not to brag, but I mean,
that's a theme for you today, the ironic part.
But to your point about that, the one thing that I said about the going into the Oregon game that you basically touched on was, if this comes down to a 1-possession game, which coaching staff do I want on which coaching staff sideline do I want to be on, Oregon or Washington? And it was Washington. And look how the game turned out. Dan Lanning decides to go for it. Kalen does and doesn't. One coaching's decisions ended up costing the game. And now, again, yes, you could say Washington doesn't punch it in on the 1-yard line. They get in, it's even closer, etc. So there's a lot of, again, it was by no means a perfect game for either staff, but at the end of the day, the one that came with the result was the better coaching staff.
Absolutely. And that's the whole point. I think that's something that, like, just to kind of put a bow on this, as we stare down the month of November, as people probably listen to this on Tuesday, happy Halloween, by the way, as people listen to this on Tuesday, right before November begins, one thing that separates, outside of like talent is great, but one thing that will separate the good from the great is the coaching staff. And this coaching staff is somebody that I would make sure that I'd want to be on the side of. And before we're going to, on the other side of this break here on Locked On Huskies, we're going to talk about can Washington go undefeated? Because it's a possibility. We'll talk a lot more about it. But first, we're going to take a second and talk about our friends over at Game Time, because there are only 2 home games left in 2023, Husky fans, and you're going to want to get your tickets while you can. And that should also be a low stress experience for you, because you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And just a lot of the great things about Game Time: last minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals. It's so easy to buy and find tickets for every kind of event in your area. Game Time is also the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. You can buy tickets in just 2 taps, and all-in prices show your total upfront, so you know you're getting a great deal without hidden fees. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. So, Lars, you said it to me a little bit like right before we pressed record, but we were still doing our prep, and you're like, can Washington go undefeated? They can. Will they? I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, again, to take a page out of Kalen DeBoer's playbook, it starts this week because you can keep that momentum going this week, or you could start to take another step back this week. And I think this is kind of the perfect opportunity for, I know your favorite coach on the West Coast, Alex Grinch, to, you know, have Washington, it becomes a shooting gallery, right? I mean, this game could become not only just a shootout, but a shooting gallery in general, to where there's so many big plays that are going to happen in this game. I think no matter how good Washington's defense improves and how good potentially USC's defense could be in terms of everything magic that came together this week, right? I'm saying in terms of, like, you know, I forgot who asked the question, but somebody asked, I believe, Ryan Grubb, what are your thoughts on USC's defense? And it's like, they're athletic. You know, that right. Exactly. I was almost positive as you, but I was like, just let you raise your hand on that. But, you know, to that point, it was like, okay, well, he didn't take the shot that was open to him, but it's one of those where you almost know this is a Kalen DeBoer versus Lincoln Riley game. This is even though the defenses are probably going to have a couple of plays in this game, there's no way that, I mean, Caleb Williams is once in a generation type of a quarterback, very rarely. And I mean, and again, it's like, for all intents and purposes, it's like, you can have a great quarterback, but that doesn't mean you're a national champion, right? You can be a Heisman winner, but you're not a national champion. So I think it's a matter of, the better team is Washington. The better quarterback, is Caleb Williams now.
You can't argue with the number one overall pick in the draft. You can't.
Right. But that's with all due respect to Mike. It's not like this is like a massive gulf between the two. No. But I think it's going to come down to those tangibles where, okay, who's going to make the play? Because obviously at some point we've seen Caleb struggle to make those plays at times this season. You know, he's running around, running for his life. Can't find anybody open, so he maybe gets a 5 or 10 yard thing. Those opportunities with an edge rusher like Braylon Trice, who had 16 pressures against Stanford, that's an opportunity where somebody's got to eat there. Somebody's got to make those long extended plays cost USC and not Washington. That's going to be where the deciding factor is going to come into play. But then after this game, you start all over again, because until you get to past Utah, you have 2 games left. So once you can get into the position to where, hey, we have, I believe it's Utah, Washington State.
Utah, then Oregon State, then Washington State.
So Oregon State, then Washington State to close out the season. So let's say you go and you're 9-0, 10-0 going into Corvallis. Okay, you can drop that one if it's close, right? And you know, I wouldn't be surprised
at the beginning of the season
to your preseason pick, but also at the same point, it could be inverted, right? To where if you lose at USC and then you win out the rest of the season, and then you face Oregon in the Pac-12 Championship Game and beat Oregon again, you don't necessarily lose momentum. It's more of like a heat check, a reality check, if you will, to where, okay, we probably should have lost some game somewhere along the line in October, but we didn't. Let's lose it to USC, who is still a top 25 team, make it a close game, make it basically an offensive showcase to where it's like, hey, look, the offense is clearly back. Because the problem is, if you have anywhere near the level of execution that you had against Arizona State, that opens the door for a terrible USC defense to get confident. And that's a scary idea. And that's, I think, going back to what I said for Monday's show today, what I said yesterday, it won't be a 17-10 or a 24-10, but that's how that opens the door for that, to where, hey, if the defenses can kind of get confident early in the game, then those scores that under, it becomes a lot harder, or the over becomes a lot harder to hit, because you're taking away those possessions. And yes, you can play catch up, but it's never going to get to where it should.
I know we'll get into the over under for this for this USC game a little bit. But that's like, I like what you're saying. And I think that the one thing that I want to touch on is, I think we touched on in the first segment too, where you said that they just need to get through this week. And what is that? That's the 1-0 mindset that we talked about, right? That's really all this can be. That's all you can ask for. That's all you can look for at this point, is just find a way. And that's what they've done to this point this year. They found a way against Arizona. they found a way against Oregon. Then they did it again against Arizona State. And then they did it again against Stanford. I saw somebody on some Duck fan on Twitter said, oh, Washington's three fourth downs away from being on a 3-game losing streak. But they're not. Like, you can play revisionist history all you want. That's fine. I get it. That's part of football. I do it all the time. Like, it's fun. The reality of the situation is the team is 8-0 and ranked at number 5. And not only do they deserve their flowers for that, but there is potential here. And it feels like if you just kind of like, and this is coming from you and I, who we're around this program every day, right? It's what we do. We're there in the building. We get to talk to these players and we get to just get a vibe of just kind of what's going on. I feel like the worst of everything that we've seen is kind of behind them at this point, because even like the Arizona State game, yeah, and then the Stanford game, and Kalen DeBoer said, like, yeah, most of our guys are feeling a lot better. Ryan Grubb said Michael Penix looks like he's feeling a lot better. Said the best that he's felt in about 10 days or so. And quick math there, that would put it at before the Arizona State game. Just throwing that out there. But that's something where it feels like all the execution, all the issues, where we're going to talk more about health too. The health on offense is getting there. Right. There's still some questions that need to be answered, but the offensive line looks like it's been solidified. And Utah and Oregon State are going to be very tough defensive matchups for this team. Washington State still is going to present issues defensively. USC has Bear Alexander, who's going to present an issue along the defensive front. And Ryan Grubb was very quick to shout him out during the press conference today. But there are a whole lot of things where it just kind of feels like, okay, the worst here is behind them. The worst there is behind them. The one question that I have, because it's not like everything is perfect, the one question I have is, we saw Ashton Daniels make a ton of just really, really nice throws against the secondary, where he was on the move and just threw it deep and was able to figure things out, like on the back end of the defense. Can those be solidified? Can you make one or two more of those plays and just shut down a couple more drives and just kind of what does it look like there? That's my biggest question moving forward.
Yeah, well, think about the lane that Ashton ran up to get that first touchdown. Imagine Caleb Williams having that lane.
Yeah, that's not
at any point on the field. Never mind in the goal line. I mean, like,
that can't happen.
So to your point, getting those mistakes out of the way before then and fixing that, but we have to give the defensive coaching staff some credit here, because the tackling got better. I get still. I'm not saying it's perfect by any stretch. Sacks were still missed, things like that, but certainly the tackling was better. And so we're seeing the improvements on defense. Now, can the scheme kind of tighten up a little bit? Can those missed assignments I still can't believe they had 12 men on the field for that play. Like, how did that happen? Yeah, we did not get to talk to Chuck Morrell, the defensive play caller, on Monday, so we will talk to him likely on Wednesday, which I will ask that question if nobody else does. But the point of what we're getting at is the problems are getting fixed, but there are still problems, right? Same thing with the offense, right? Where Bernard came back, but J-Mac did not, or did but did not, right? The running game is kind of there, but not, right? And so there's things that are still in the works that could get worked out, and this is kind of the perfect game where this is a game you play up for, right? If you're Will Nixon and you get a few extra yards, or you get a few extra carries or whatever, don't you want to pop off against USC on ABC on primetime and with a national audience? Same thing with Oregon, right? And that's kind of the same thing that happened, right? Where at times players that have played average or slightly above average really took that next step. Raylan Goforth also, I mean,
he looked good.
Like,
yeah.
And just in time to play his former program. So I think you can't tell me that hit on Cam Rising can't be equal on Caleb Williams if Raylan Goforth gets the chance.
I respect your line of thinking there. One other thing that I want to mention, just in kind of terms of getting through the worst of things energy wise, it almost felt like a Super Bowl hangover kind of moment, right? Where it's not like Oregon is Super Bowl. I'm not, because I've already seen that too much in social media. That's not what I'm saying here. But the energy of that game and the energy of everything that happened that whole day. Lars, we were there for 16 hours? We were on campus for like 16 hours that day. Like, that was an electric day entirely. That cannot be matched. And then Arizona State, the crowd was awesome that day. I want to give them the credit for that. But it's just not the same, right? Playing a one-win team at the time. And then playing Stanford at Stanford, where there were like 7 people in the crowd. Like I think I counted 7, but that's the whole thing is USC. There's going to be energy, right? Because on the road, it's Caleb against Caleb Williams against just a good team, and then at home against Utah, same thing, really good team, ranked team. There's going to be a battle there. Oregon State, last time going down there after the renovations, everything like that, that place is sold out. That's going to be jumping. And then, of course, the Apple Cup. There's a whole lot of energy to be had this month. And what have we seen from this team over the last 2 years? When they need to arise to the challenge, they do that. And that's all credit to the coaching staff.
Yeah, I mean, same thing with the Alamo Bowl, where you're playing basically in Texas's backyard, and what do? You have a flea flicker on the first play of the game to Jalen Polk for a deep shot to say, "Yeah, here we go." Just drop this on the table here and call it even. It's like that energy is not there right now, but I think all the pieces are there to have the energy back. And the thing, to that point, you don't want to blow that energy too early, right? And so, yeah, the Oregon game might have cost him a lot of energy, but it doesn't feel like they threw all their eggs into that basket just to beat Oregon and then have a couple of drop-offs. Meaning have a couple of losses, right? Because again, we said it. They have not lost any games this year. It might feel like they did. Mike Farrell, as you pointed out a couple of days ago, had the great lead where it's like it almost felt like it was almost a loss, but it wasn't. And so it's like that's where this team last year would have lost those two.
Right. And Kalen said that himself.
Yep. Exactly.
And we're going to move on because we've got a lot of injury stuff to talk about because Ryan Grubb dropped an unexpected one today when he talked about Giles Jackson's injury, which we were kind of like, oh, didn't really know much about that. But before we do that, we're going to give a shout out to our good friends over at FanDuel, because right now you can score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL. Lars, is the line still 71.5 this weekend for Washington USC, or has it moved a little bit?
Oh, the over-under?
Yeah.
Yeah,
the line is Washington by 4.5, right?
3.5.
3.5. Okay, so it's moved.
And the over/under is 75.5.
7.
Yeah, that was my reaction. In case you're wondering, when I was looking down on my phone, that's what I was doing, is I was looking that up because there will be points in this game, ladies and gentlemen.
And shout out to Northwestern Iowa, who are just on the other end of that spectrum. Oh, you hadn't seen that line?
No, did I miss that?
Oh, it's 29.5. That is the over/under. 29.5. But we're not going to harp on that. We are going to talk about Washington's injuries. So let's we teased Giles Jackson. Let's start with that. Where was it you who asked the question? Like where Giles' red shirt, or somebody asked that question today. And Ryan Grubb said, yeah, he actually didn't practice all week. He was dealing with an ankle injury. So the red shirt is still there. There's still a possibility for that. I'm kind of see how the rest of the month plays out. But I thought that one was interesting because we saw Denzel Boston returning punts, and I thought he looked pretty good. Giles definitely has that little bit of experience in that regard, but I was impressed with Denzel Boston. But the big one is Jalen McMillan, right? That's the one we need to talk about right off the bat.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if you were wanting me to.
Oh no, yeah.
So I asked Ryan Grubb. I asked Ryan and Kalen about Jalen McMillan. I asked Ryan Grubb how Jalen McMillan responded from the game, and he was honest. It's emotional. I think Jalen McMillan is an emotional player, and for him to, as the coaches say, play fast and loose or fast and free or however you want to call it, having that injury, and especially I think Grubb noted it, but also Kalen also touched on it. Jalen McMillan plays pretty violently in terms of his cuts, everything is sharp, it's pristine. And when you're doing that, and then you also have to think, I think that's also why he got that drop, right? Because a normal Jalen McMillan does not drop that ball. Because it was right there, it just went right. I think it almost was like a second nature in his head, like, oh, I made it through the cut, but I'm like not deer in headlights. It almost just kind of seemed like he was thinking about something else instead of catching the ball. And I think that's where that injury comes into play.
So I wanted to add on to that because one other thing that Grubb said, he kind of mentioned like a trust factor with his knee. And I get it. Like, yeah, it's hard to fully trust that. And maybe that's kind of where like you think, oh, it gives out a little bit. And so he said they're trying to brace this week because that was actually one thing that I didn't really look super close against either Oregon or Stanford when he was on the field, especially against Stanford. Like, you and I weren't able to make the trip down there. I didn't see him wearing any kind of brace. And I know that can be restricting for certain players, but that's one thing where I was kind of thinking about that. I was like, why not try that? Just kind of see if it'll provide the extra support that might be needed to just kind of like give you a little bit more stability to make those cuts.
I don't think Jalen. Let me phrase this correctly. Jalen McMillan with a brace feels like Michael Penix with a parachute. You want him riding shotgun, driving it. You don't want him reserved. You don't want. I mean, again, you want Jalen McMillan out there, right? You want him on the field if he's able to play. But I think almost given the weapons you have in the room, it's better to play somebody else, Denzel, Giles if he's healthy, Jeremy if he's healthy, versus somebody on a brace where it's like, okay, well, what happens if some, USC defender, for example, or any defender for that matter, but just since it's USC week, takes a shot at his knee, right? Just goes for a tackle and see the. It's almost like, if you put a quarterback with a brace on, it's like there's a target there where you're not hitting high, you're hitting low, you're hitting in the midsection, you're hitting, trying to tackle, and not intentional, right? There's no dirty play, but it's just it's not even like that wasn't the route that I'm thinking about. With that, it's just more of this will not only provide extra stability and give him a little bit more confidence to make cuts and going that direction. But it's just kind of like if it's just like a light sleeve or something where it's just adding a little bit of support that might be what he needs for a couple of weeks to get him over the hump, because that's what both Kalen and Ryan said. Sleeve versus brace, two different things in my opinion, because I think I think of it as a brace. The first thing that pops in my head is watching guard Memolo, which I know offensive linemen are different, but I think the point of what I was getting at was if Jalen has a sleeve, kind of like a fire sleeve on your arm sort of thing, then easily you're able to play through that. You could wear it under the leggings and everything like that. But if you have a full-on brace to where you got it wrapped or anything like that, it's going to slow him down. He's not going to be able to run as much as I think he would want to with a sleeve, to your point.
I don't think it would be like the full, like, yeah, this is what Bill Belichick requires all his offensive linemen to wear on both knees kind of thing. Just kind of like whether it be a brace or a sleeve or something like that, just like a lighter one where it's just giving him a little bit extra assistance. Because you're right, you don't want him to be too limited, but you also want to make sure that he has that confidence. And moving on, because I know there are a bunch of other players we want to talk about. Julius Buelow looked like he played really well. And I think that Grubb touched on, he's not fully back at 100% yet, but he looked really good. And that was something where if I'm Scott Huff, I feel a lot better about the offensive line moving forward. But I know that some of the guys we want to talk about really are on the defensive side of the ball. Is there anyone you wanted to just start with? Because we got Tuli Gasanoa. We talked about Asa Turner. The update on Vince Nunley is he's probably not going to play this week, but again, still not injury related. We talked about that on yesterday's show. We won't go into that. And then Cameron Fabiculon is the other one. Is there anywhere you want to start there?
I think honestly, Cam Fab to me is the one that's most impactful. I mean, Tuli is impactful in a different way, but I think going back to front here, I think because they've seen that they can play, no disrespect, can play without Asa Turner as long as you have Cam Fab back there. When you don't have Asa and Cam back there, and Dom's, to your point, you mentioned on yesterday's show, playing a little out of position. I'm honestly surprised they haven't pushed Mish back there because he, I think, would be perfect to at least
he's played so well at Husky. I wouldn't want to move him.
No, but I'm saying if you move Dom to Husky just to play him down and use the big ball, I'm not saying this is ideal, right? It's more like an emergency situation. But I think if you're not going to have Vince Dunley, who certainly kind of is that long, lengthy, but it's still athletic guy that can run, almost like an extra cornerback, that would be my next move. But I think not Cam Fab, that's a big loss that they don't have him, because his versatility, and he's grown a lot this year, just in terms of his ability to read offenses, make plays.
He's progressed so much.
He's a guy to where I'm not saying he was an afterthought, but I don't think anybody expected him after last season to have this season. But that's a complete credit to Cam Fab, because I remember the coaches said in fall camp, "No, Cam, like he's that guy," and we're like, he's that guy.
Okay, like yeah.
Okay. And then every single week this season, he's been like, "Oh, yep, oh, okay, oh, yep." And he gets a pick, and it's just like he hasn't, in my opinion, taken a step back at any point this season. With him being out, he just isn't available. I don't view that as a step back, But on the field, it's a step back when you see the production and the impact that the other guys have. Not that McElhistine can't hold it down and things like that, but CamFab has really kind of cemented himself as that next safety at Washington, where it's like, yeah, he can kind of do it all, and being able to play corner and do all that stuff. I mean, he understands opposing offenses and the defense. That's what's allowed him to have so much success this season.
No, absolutely. Because the one guy I want to make sure we talked about was Tooley, right?
Yeah.
Where I asked William Inch today about Javon Parker, who's looked really, really effective in what's been a somewhat limited snap count. And I feel like a big reason for that is because Tooley has played so well. And William Inch talked a lot about how he's been so good at just holding down the middle of the field and just kind of being that run defender that you expect, where he just kind of turns guys in other directions. And he didn't play against Stanford, kind of was there as kind of in a case of emergency kind of thing. But I think that he's going to play against USC, and he's going to be just a really important part of not only collapsing the pocket against Caleb Williams, but just kind of holding ground and not letting him or even Marshawn Lloyd or whoever else just run between the tackles.
Yeah, well, it's his size. It's his he has the perfect interior D lineman size to where he's not a huge big body like a Tooley or even Fatui, but he's athletic enough to be a disruptor. And I think that's where that trade-off comes into play. I mean, the ironic part is I believe no, he played in every game this season. So I think the fact
so he's out there for a couple of snaps. I just don't remember saying it.
But right. But to your point, it was not as much of a role, but every time he's been asked to have an increased role, he's delivered. So I think, he did against Michigan State. So I think this is kind of another big one for him, knowing he's going to be that next guy in 2024, getting him even more confidence, kind of rounding him out, similar to last season.
I thought you were talking about Tooley, because Javon Parker, he's played every. I was just saying he's been on a somewhat limited rep count.
Right, but he also played against Stanford, and so
Tooley did.
No, Javon did. So I wasn't sure if you were saying
did.
Javon did. Okay, I wasn't sure if you were saying Javon didn't play it off, but yeah, but to your point, to wrap this on the hobo, that every time Javon Parker, similar to CamFab, right, when they've been asked to have more of an increased role, they have delivered. And so when you don't have those guys out there, or when you don't have them out there, there's a significant drop off. And so I think either getting Tooley back is going to be key. And then even with Tooley back, I think even just getting Javon even some more reps to allow him to grow even more, I think that's irreplaceable. And say that would almost Vince Dunley would be my Javon Parker, except we haven't seen Vince Dunley, so
it's fair.
Unfortunate.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here, and all the everydayers out there, thank you so much for tuning in. We really do appreciate it as we continue to watch the show grow. It's really awesome, and we love how engaged you guys are. Really means the world to us. And if you're not an everydayer yet, hey, welcome. We appreciate you being here. And if you want to become one, it's really easy. There's so many ways to do it. Just subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, here on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We are there. We are everywhere. Please make sure you hit that subscribe button. It really does help us out a lot. And then leave us a 5-star review, like the video, leave us a comment, follow us on Twitter, do all those things. We want to make sure that you're engaged in every way possible. Stay tuned. We got some great stuff coming up for you this week. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Wednesday.